A woman wakes up in the middle of the night because her room has gone cold, and not because she left a window open, just this strange, creeping chill that settled over everything. The kind that somehow tells you something's wrong before you even open your eyes. So it's a little after 2 in the morning, and the house is dark except for the landing light. Her eyes adjust as she scans the room, and she sees something in the thin bit of light right against the white of the bedroom door. There's a strange shape standing there, and it's tall, maybe 6 feet, slightly hunched like it's stooping to squeeze itself under the frame, and it's covered with thick, dark fur. The top half looks like a wolf, and the bottom half looks like a man. And as if a wolf man standing in your bedroom isn't strange enough, she kind of just stands there. She doesn't even scream. What she feels instead isn't only fear, it's like she's being coerced. It's kind of like a pull, as if something is subversively persuading her to get up and go follow it. So she does. She watches it turn and move out onto the landing, and she hears those big, heavily padded footsteps heading down the stairs, like a big animal walking upright, trailing off in front of her. By the time she reaches the bottom, it's already gone, somewhere towards the back of the house. And at this point, she kind of comes to and says, "What was that?" Now, before we get into the story, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Now, the woman standing alone at the bottom of the stairs wasn't some kid that's telling a ghost story at the time. She was one of the most respected experts in her field in all of Britain, a serious academic, pretty much the last person you'd ever expect to have her name attached to a werewolf. And she wasn't even the first person to see it. This is really the story of 2 small stone heads. 2 ugly little carved faces that got dug out of an ordinary back garden by 2 ordinary boys. And what happened after those heads turned up has been argued over 50 years now by archaeologists, by geologists, by the BBC, even by grown adults who still get a little uneasy remembering it from when they were children. Some people say it was an ancient curse, some say the whole thing is a hoax, and some say it has something to do with science, but they still don't have a word for it. But the explanation that everyone gives to allow them to sleep at night turns out to be the most unsettling part of this story. Now, if you're thinking there's absolutely no way a 6-foot-tall wolf man and a couple of garden decorations belong in the same story, well, congratulations. You're currently as confused as every investigator who's ever touched this case. So grab your pitchfork, because every good monster hunt has to start somewhere, and this one starts in an ordinary little garden in northern England. Welcome to Hexham. It's a small market town in Northumberland, the far north of England, about 25 miles west of Newcastle, sitting just south of the River Tyne. And it's one of those places where history is sort of stacked up underneath you. You've got Hadrian's Wall a few miles up the road, and an old abbey with a crypt that was literally built out of stones the Romans left behind. And underneath all of that, long before the Romans ever turned up, was the land of the Celtic tribes. But by 1971, none of that is really on anyone's mind. It's just their home, a normal northern town where normal people are getting on with their lives. And one of those normal families is the Robsons. They've moved into number 3 Reed Avenue, which is a little 2-bedroom council house on a street where every house pretty much looks identical to the one next door. They've only been there for a couple weeks, and like most families on the estate, there's nothing remarkable about them all. In fact, they'd probably be the first to tell you that themselves. There are 2 boys in the house, Colin, who's 11, and his younger brother, Leslie, who's around 9. And on a day at the end of May, the 2 of them are out in the back garden doing what bored brothers do, just messing about in the dirt. And at some point, Colin's digging around a hedge, and his fingers catch on to something that feels hard. He scrapes at the soil a bit more and gets hold of something round and heavy, pulls it out and brushes the dirt off. And at first, it looks like a little stone ball about the size of his fist. But as he keeps wiping it clean, a nose appears, and then a mouth, and then 2 little beady eyes. It's a tiny carved head. He shows Leslie, and the 2 of them start scrabbling around in the same patch of dirt to see if there's any more. And amazingly, Leslie pulls out a second one out of the ground. So now, there's 2, one for each boy. 2 little stone faces, roughly greenish gray with these flecks of quartz in them that catch the light when you turn them over. and each one has a stubby bit of neck at the bottom as if they were snapped off of something bigger. And these stones aren't quite matching either. One of them's got stripes carved into it like combed back hair, kind of like a boy, and the other one's a bit rougher with bulgy eyes and a sort of a beaky nose. It kind of looks like an old woman. They look creepy. Maybe they're Roman remains, but honestly, to these two boys in 1971, they aren't creepy at all. It's buried treasure. So the boys do exactly what they do at this age. They take the treasure inside to show their mom. They run next door to show it off to the neighbor's little boy. And then the two heads get set down on a shelf in the house like a couple of ornaments. And for a little while, that's all they were. Just two odd little faces sitting on a shelf in an ordinary house on an ordinary street in an ordinary town. But that doesn't last. Every so often, they notice that someone's moving the heads because they keep turning around. The boys had put them on the shelf facing in the room, and then the next morning, you'd see that they're turned facing the garden in the direction that they were dug up from. The first time it happened, nobody really panicked about it. The family just assumed one of the kids knocked it off the shelf, or somebody dusted it and put it back wrong. Or maybe you misremembered which way they were actually facing to begin with. But it keeps happening. They get left facing one way at night, and by breakfast turned again. And after a while, the family starts to realize that no one is actually touching them. The heads are just moving on their own, slowly working their way back around to stare out at the garden, night after night, almost like they're trying to get home. And not long after, stranger things begin to happen. The house starts making noises. There's sounds at night with no real source. A sharp crack from behind the television, a kind of tapping sound that sounds a lot like claws on linoleum floor. Things that have been sitting safely on shelves for long periods of time suddenly turn up smashed on the ground in the morning, with no one around to have broken them. Doors that were definitely shut are now found wide open. And at one point, the family actually watches bottles being flung across from the room. This is the stuff that people mean when they say poltergeist. Things moving, things breaking, and noises coming out of nowhere. But none of this happened until the heads came inside. The Robsons had been living in that house for weeks beforehand, and nothing had ever gone wrong. And then two little stone faces come in from the garden, and suddenly the whole house is trying to turn inside out. And as unsettling as all this is, the heads moving, the noises, all things breaking on their own, it's about to stop being just the Robsons' problem. Their house is located at number 3 Reed Avenue, which is a semi-detached house, which means the Robsons share a wall with the family next door at number 1. The Dodds, Isaac and Ellen Dodd, and their kids, just an ordinary working family on the same street. And the Robson boys, being boys, had already taken the heads round to show them off to the Dodds' young son. And not long after that, the Dodds start having their own problems. It begins with their 10-year-old son, Brian. Brian starts saying something's bothering him at night, that something's touching him in bed, pressing against him under the covers, pulling at his hair. Mom, Ellen, does what every mother usually does when they think their kid is having nightmares or they think that there's monsters living under the bed. She tells him, "There's nothing there. There's nothing to be afraid of, sweetie. Go back to sleep." But the weirdest thing Ellen can't shake is that their house is starting to smell a bit strange, kind of like a wet dog, but no one in the home can pinpoint exactly where it's coming from, but they can smell it, and they shrug it off. But as days pass, one night, it happens to Ellen as well. You see, Brian's suddenly feeling sick, so Ellen decides to sleep in Brian's room to keep an eye on him. And Brian's at it again. He keeps whispering that something's touching him, that something's there. And Ellen's had enough of it. She sits up in the dark and tells him to stop this once and for all. She tells him, "Stop being daft, Brian. There's nothing in the room." And that's when she sees it. There's a tall, dark shape standing in the middle of the bedroom. And as she's looking at it, trying to work out what she's even looking at, it starts to move towards her. And she describes it as a half man, half animal with a face like a sheep. It comes up right to her and she feels it touch her, actually feels it press against her legs in the dark. And then it drops down on all fours and it moves out of the room. Ellen screams and the whole house wakes up. It's loud enough that the Robsons hear it through the wall next door. And when somebody goes to check, the front door at the Dodds' house is standing wide open, like whatever it was had simply let itself out and padded off down the street. Ellen Dodd never got over it. She was so badly shaken by what she saw in that room, she went to the Hexham Council and asked to be moved out of the house altogether, and the council agreed. So the Dodds packed up and they left Reed Avenue for good. But the thing is, the half-wolf creature turning up around Hexham wasn't actually a new idea to the people living there. Not even close. Back in the winter of 1904, this exact area had been terrorized by a wolf, a real bona fide wolf. It's believed to have escaped from a private menagerie nearby, and over a few weeks it terrorized and killed somewhere around 40 sheep across the moors around Hexham and Allendale, absolutely ripping them apart. The whole district went into a panic. They formed armed search parties, over 100 men at one point with dogs, all out hunting this thing, and eventually, a wolf was found dead on a railway line a few miles away, cut in two by a train. But when the owner of the menagerie was brought in to identify it, he said, "No, that wolf was too old. That's not my animal." Which meant, as far as the locals were concerned, the real beast was still out there. So now we're back to the 1970s, and a half-wolf creature is turning up in bedrooms a 10-minute walk from where the wolf used to hunt. And people start putting two and two together. The old Hexham wolf, they say, has come back, and it must be because the Heads have brought it with them. And by this point, the Robsons have had enough of it, so they get the Heads out of the house and they hand them over to the Hexham Abbey, the big old church in town, and from there, the Heads make their way to the Museum of Antiquities at Newcastle University, where actual academics can have a proper look at them. And it works. The moment the Heads leave the house, the trouble at Reed Avenue stops. No more turning heads, no more noises in the night, no more broken glass. They even bring a priest in to bless the houses on the street, just to be safe. And that's it. There is peace for the Robsons. The whole nightmare is over the second those stones are out the door, which seems to prove true, right? The Heads were the problem. Get rid of the Heads and the problem goes away. Except the Heads do not stop moving, because over at Newcastle, word gets to a woman named Dr. Ann Ross. She's one of the leading Celtic scholars in the entire country. Her whole specialty is ancient Celtic religion, and in particular, something the Celts believed about the human head. The head was sacred. That was the seat of the soul, the most important part of a person. She's written books about it. She even keeps her own personal collection of ancient Celtic stone heads at home. So when she hears that there are two mysterious stone heads turning up in Newcastle that might be Celtic, she wants them. She has them sent down to her at University of Southampton, which is about 300 miles south of Hexham. So she can't compare them against the ones she's already got. Ann Ross hasn't heard a single one of these ghost stories, and she doesn't know about the Dodds. She doesn't know about the creature. She's never heard a word about the 1904 wolf attacks. To her, these are just two very interesting old stones for her research. So the Heads arrive at her home in Southampton in late 1971, and the first strange thing is she has this overwhelming feeling, like an instant, instinctive dislike. She hates them, which you can't really explain because honestly, they look no different from the dozens of other Celtic heads she's handled over the years. But she shrugs it off because she's got teachings to do. She's busy, so she puts the heads back in their box. She sets them down in her study and tells herself that she'll make a proper start on examining them in the morning. Then she does what you do at the end of a long day. She has dinner, she sees the kids, and she goes up to bed. After some time, around 2 in the morning, she wakes up freezing cold. Her heart's racing and she doesn't know why. She turns and looks towards the bedroom door, and there it is, a tall, stooping shape, black against the white door. The top half a wolf, the bottom half a man. Remember the woman in the beginning of the story? This is her, Dr. Ann Ross. So she wakes her husband, and the two of them go around the entire house, top to bottom, and they find nothing. So now she thinks, okay, maybe this is a bad dream, like a very vivid nightmare. But a few days later, her teenage daughter Bernice comes home from school. The house is empty. Both parents are out at work. Bernice lets herself into the front door, and standing on the staircase in front of her is a big black shape. She describes it as near a werewolf as anything, and it's just standing there. And it comes towards her and it vaults straight over the banister, and it lands in the hallway with a heavy but soft thud. Then it rushes off towards the back of the house and disappears into the music room at the end of the corridor. When her parents get home, they find Bernice pale as fresh linens, absolutely terrified. So as days pass, this whole family starts feeling a very cold presence in this house, and inexplicable things begin happening in the house. The study door bursts open on its own. There's a soft tapping sound near the stairs. People who came to visit say they can feel something wrong in the place, a kind of presence that's evil. And even her level-headed husband admits that the house has what he calls a guest. So Anne Ross puts the ideas together. The sudden weirdness ties directly to the sudden heads, and she does what other families do. She got rid of the heads, and the relief was immediate. She said a cloud was lifted off the house, and everybody felt it at once. But getting rid of the 2 Hexham heads wasn't quite enough, because the strange feeling in the house didn't fully go away. Not until she got rid of every other Celtic stone head in her collection and had the entire house exorcised. Only then did it finally go away. And that changes the whole shape of the story. This wasn't just a haunted house on a council estate in Hexham. The trouble had traveled 300 miles to a woman who'd never heard a word of the ghost stories, who didn't believe any of it, and who had every professional reason in the world to stay skeptical. It didn't matter where the heads went or who ended up holding them. The heads carried it with them, and whatever it was, the heads were about to be handed on yet again to people who knew exactly what they were supposed to be dealing with, and they wanted them anyways. The next man to take the heads was a scientist, Don Robbins. And Don is interesting because he wasn't frightened by any of the heads. He was fascinated by them. He was a chemist. He worked with crystals and minerals, and he had a theory. He believed that stone, especially stone with a lot of quartz in it, like these heads, might be able to record things. Not like record sound, but events, strong emotions, traumatic moments. The idea was that under the right conditions, a rock could soak up a powerful event the way a tape recorder soaks up a voice, and then much later, play it back. So a haunting, in his view, wouldn't be a ghost at all. It'd be more like a recording stuck on a loop, replaying something that happened a long, long time ago. People sometimes call this the stone tape theory. And there was actually a famous BBC horror play about it around the same time. So Robbins looks at these 2 little quartz-packed heads with their whole reputation for terrifying everyone who owned them and thought, if any object on Earth is going to prove my theory, it's these. So in 1977, he goes and collects them, and almost straight away, things start to get strange. The moment he puts the heads in his car, the car's entire electrical system just dies, dead, all at once. And Robbins, half jokingly, kind of half not, actually tells the heads out loud to stop it, and the electronics turn back on. Once he gets home, he notices that the female head, the hag as he calls it, feels wrong. He describes this heavy, stifling, almost breathless feeling around her, and he gets this unnerving sense that her eyes are following him, that if he turns her to face the wall, her gaze sort of slides around to watch him. And when he tried to photograph them, the pictures came out blurry. They were washed out and overexposed, like something definitely did not want to be photographed. And as days passed, Robbins receives a request from a fellow named Frank Hyde down in London. Hyde is a dowser, or maybe he's an astrologer, or maybe he's an electrical engineer. Possibly all 3. Who knows? But the point was, he wanted to run his own experiments on the heads, and Robbins was curious as well, so he agreed to lend them out. And that is the last clear sighting anybody has of the Hexham Heads, because shortly afterward, Frank Hyde had a serious car accident, and then he just goes quiet. Robbins tries to get back in touch with him to check on the experiments to get the heads back, and he can't. The calls go unanswered. Hyde becomes impossible to reach. Robbins later wrote that the man had completely vanished, as if he walked into a fairy hill out of a folktale, and the heads went with him. That's it. That's where the trail ends. 2 ancient-looking stone heads that terrified 2 families in Hexham, drove a neighbor out of her own home, and haunted one of Britain's top Celtic scholars 300 miles away. And then they simply dropped out of existence sometime around 1978, and they've never been seen since. Nobody knows where they are right now. They could be in a landfill, they could be in a box in someone's attic with the owner having no clue what they have, or they could be back in the ground. But the story itself didn't disappear, because back in 1976, before the heads vanished, Anne Ross had gone on national television to talk about all of this on a hugely popular BBC program called Nationwide, the kind of show families watch together over their tea. She calmly described the Wolfman walking out of her bedroom, and then, right in the middle of the report, the program cut to a clip of a snarling werewolf, Oliver Reed in full monster makeup from an old Hammer horror film, on the early evening news with children watching. And that moment scared a whole generation of British kids half to death, and people have talked about it for decades. But here's the strange part. The footage was then lost. For years, the audio had gone missing, and the report was basically unwatchable. Until 2024, when the BBC managed to recover the missing sound, partly by using AI to hunt for one specific phrase from the broadcast. The lower part was human. They found it buried on the tail end of a completely unrelated religious program. So almost 50 years later, the thing comes back. The lost recordings surface, which for a story about objects that got buried, dug up, and then lost all over again, feels almost too on the snout. So while the heads were still doing the rounds, terrifying everyone who touched them, a local man came forward with a very simple explanation. His name is Desmond Craigie. And Craigie said, "Okay, look, there's no mystery here at all because I made them." What? Craigie had lived at number 3 Reed Avenue years before the Robsons, and it had been his family's house for a very long time. And he said back in 1956, he made those heads himself. Not as ancient ritual objects, not as anything special, but as toys for his little daughter. His little daughter, Nancy, had asked him what he did at work, and at the time, he happened to be working at a place that made things out of concrete and cast stone. So, on one lunch break, he knocked together a few small heads out of stone, sand, and water, and took them home for her to play with. He made 3. One got lost, and the other 2 ended up in the garden, kicked around, forgotten slowly, and buried, until 2 boys dug them out about 15 years later, and the whole country lost its mind. And when a reporter asked him about it, Craigie was practically laughing. He said he made them, and he definitely made them, and he could not understand what all the fuss was about. He was quite literally laughing his head off over the whole thing. Okay, so what you're telling us is these heads weren't 1800 years old, they weren't Celtic, and they weren't cursed. They were a dad's lunch break craft project from the 1950s, and everything else, the werewolf, the poltergeist, all of it, was just people's imaginations running away with them around 2 lumps of concrete. People asked Craigie to prove it, to sit down and make another head exactly the way he supposedly had in 1956. So he did, and the ones he made didn't really match at all. They were cruder, rougher, and they were not as skillfully made, not nearly as good as the originals, which is kind of strange, right? Because let's be honest here, the originals weren't exactly fine art in the first place, but Craigie couldn't quite recreate his own toys. And so, years later, a journalist named Paul Screeton, who's spent decades digging into this case more than anyone, sat down with Colin Robson, one of the 2 boys who dug up the heads as a kid. And during that conversation, Colin showed him something he made a few months before he ever found those heads in the garden, before his family had even moved into that house. Colin had made a small head of his own. For a school art competition, he modeled this little head and it came second. And his teacher had looked at it and made one passing comment that it really ought to have a proper neck on it. A proper neck. The exact thing that's odd about the Hexham Heads, those stumpy, broken off little necks, like they'd been snapped from something bigger. And Colin wasn't confessing to anything. He wasn't saying he faked it or pulled a prank. He was just showing this guy a thing that he made as a boy, saying, "Huh, what a strange coincidence, right?" Let's step back and take a look at this whole thing for a second. In the 1950s, a man living in that house felt like making little stone heads. So he made 3 of them. In 1971, a boy who was about to move into that exact same house felt like making a little stone head. So he made one, and then walked out into the garden of that house and dug up 2 more. The weirdest thing about Hexham, it's absolutely covered in these things. Carved stone heads. They turn up in walls, on old churches, on monuments, and people's gardens. People have been making them for 2,000 years. There are thought to be thousands of them across north of England, packed more densely around that stretch of country than almost anywhere else on Earth. So maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. This entire story, everyone's been arguing about the same two options. Are the heads ancient and cursed, or are they modern and fake? Ross said ancient, Craigie said fake, and everyone since has just picked a side. But what if it was never about whether these two particular heads were old? What if the strange thing isn't about the heads at all? It's about making them. Because one thing that runs all the way through this story and all the way back 2,000 years of that landscape isn't a curse, and it isn't a hoax, it's people. And that one place over and over and over again, feeling the quiet little urge to pick up a bit of stone and shape it into a human head. Colin felt it, Craigie felt it, the Celts who first filled that valley with carved heads felt it, and none of them could tell you why. It's not about where the heads went, not what they were made of, but whatever's sitting in that ground, patient and old and still down there. It seems to keep reaching up through the centuries and tapping people on the shoulder and whispering the same instruction: make the head. We're never going to know what the Hexham Heads really were, and the one person who had possession of them, who wanted to really test them to figure out what they were, is gone. Frank Hyde will never come back, but maybe the heads will, who knows. But it's worth remembering that underneath all the werewolves and the curses and the theories, these were real people. Ellen Dodd was a real mother who was so frightened by something standing in her children's bedroom that she gave up her home. Whatever it actually was, fear was real to her, real enough to pack her family up and walk away from that house for good. Colin and Leslie were just two boys messing about in a garden who picked the wrong afternoon to go digging. And Ross was a serious, respected scholar who spent the rest of her life with a werewolf story stuck to her name, whether she wanted it there or not. None of them set out to become a ghost story, it just kind of happened to them and then never quite let go. So here's the thought I want to leave you with. If the strangest part of all this was never the haunting, but the making, that quiet, repeating urge in one old corner of England for ordinary people to pick up a piece of stone and carve it into a human face, then it isn't really finished, is it? It's just waiting for the next person to feel it. And maybe somewhere out there, somebody already has. They've picked up a stone, they started shaping it, they're giving it two little eyes, a nose, and a mouth, because we've all done this, right? We've scratched a face into something, we've pressed two eyes into a lump of clay, and we've doodled a little head into the corner of a page, and never once did we ask ourselves where the urge came from. So if this story got into your head, I've left another one for you right here on the screen. Another cursed object and a trail of people who wish they never touched it. But make sure to like and subscribe first. Now go on, click it. I will see you in the next one.